The human body was not meant to travel backward in time. Evolution was a one-way street, an endless march toward complexity, refinement, and societal integration. In the modern era, Quirks had accelerated this process, turning humans into fire-breathers, telekinetics, and winged marvels. But they were still, fundamentally, human. Izuku Midoriya was different. The universe, in all its infinite, chaotic wisdom, had decided that for Izuku, evolution had made a mistake. It needed to go back to the drawing board. It needed to go back 68 million years. The first sign that something was entirely wrong, or entirely right, depending on the perspective, came in a sterile, white-tiled pediatrician's office in Musudafu. Izuku was 4 years old, clutching an all-might action figure so tightly his tiny knuckles were white. Well, Mrs. Midoriya, the bald, bespectacled doctor sighed, looking at the X-ray illuminated on the wall. He possesses the double joint in his pinky toe. Usually, this is the universal indicator of being quirkless. Inko Midoriya let out a soft, heartbroken gasp. Izuku dropped his action figure. It hit the linoleum floor with a hollow clack. However, the doctor raised a finger, pushing his glasses up his nose, his brow furrowed in utter bewilderment. He shuffled a stack of blood test results. I have never seen blood work like this. His white blood cell count is erratic, his bone density is currently skyrocketing at an unnatural pace, and there is a dormant genetic marker in his DNA that, quite frankly, shouldn't exist. It resembles reptilian DNA, but the structure is massive, archaic. It's not a normal mutation. It's almost like his body is waiting for a trigger. A trigger? Inko asked, placing a protective hand on Izuku's trembling shoulder. So, he isn't quirkless? I don't know, the doctor admitted honestly. If he does have a quirk, it is buried incredibly deep. Just keep an eye on him. If he experiences growing pains, let me know. The trigger came exactly 1 week later. It was a sweltering summer afternoon at the local neighborhood playground. The air hummed with the sound of cicadas. Izuku was sitting in the sandbox, happily muttering to himself as he constructed an elaborate sand replica of the UA High School building. Across the park, Katsuki Bakugo and his small entourage of followers were showing off. Katsuki, having recently manifested his explosion quirk, was the undeniable king of the playground. He popped tiny, firecracker-like sparks from his palms, boasting loudly about how he was going to be the #1 hero. Izuku watched from afar, a small, admiring smile on his freckled face. Kaken was so cool. Then, the screaming started. It wasn't the playful shriek of children playing tag. It was a sharp, terrified wail that cut through the humid air like a knife. Izuku bolted upright, his green eyes wide. Near the edge of the park, where the chain-link fence had rusted and broken away, a stray dog had wandered in. But this was no ordinary stray. It was massive, mangy, and foaming at the mouth, likely suffering from some aggressive, feral quirk mutation. Its eyes were bloodshot, and its teeth were jagged and oversized. It had cornered a small girl with pigtails against the jungle gym. Hey! Katsuki yelled, his childish pride overriding his common sense. He ran toward the beast, popping sparks in his hands. Get away from her, you stupid mutt! Katsuki threw his hands forward, letting off a series of loud pops. The noise, meant to scare the animal, only enraged it. The mutated dog snarled, whipping its head around. With terrifying speed, it lunged at Katsuki, its heavy paws slamming into the blond boy's chest, knocking him flat onto the wood chips. The dog snapped its jaws inches from Katsuki's face, hot, putrid breath washing over him. For the first time in his life, Katsuki Bakugo froze. The sheer, overwhelming fear of a predator paralyzed him. He squeezed his eyes shut, raising his small arms in a futile attempt to block the impending bite. The bite never came. Smack! The dog yelped as a bright yellow, plastic all-might sand bucket bounced off its snout. Katsuki opened his eyes. Standing between him and the rabid dog was Izuku. The green-haired boy was trembling so violently it looked as though he might vibrate apart. Tears streamed down his round cheeks, his knees knocking together, but his arms were spread wide in a protective stance. I'll leave him alone! Izuku cried out, his voice cracking. The mutated dog, insulted by the interruption, turned its full, murderous attention toward the trembling 4-year-old. It let out a guttural growl, muscles coiling as it prepared to pounce. Izuku squeezed his eyes shut. I want to be a hero, he thought desperately. I have to save them. I have to be strong. Stronger than anything. Deep within the marrow of Izuku Midoriya's bones, a 68-million-year-old lock finally snapped open. It didn't feel like magic. It felt like fire. A localized earthquake erupted inside Izuku's chest. The air around him suddenly dropped in temperature. To Katsuki, still lying on the ground, what happened next would be permanently burned into his retinas, a core memory that would fundamentally alter the trajectory of his life. Izuku didn't just grow, he exploded outward. The boy's skin, usually soft and pale, violently rippled as thick, emerald-green scales pierced through his epidermis. His small, rounded jaw snapped forward with the sickening sound of breaking and reforming bone, elongating into a massive, terrifying snout lined with rows of 6-inch, serrated, banana-thick teeth. His legs snapped backward into a digitigrade stance, his thighs bulging with impossible, hydraulic muscle mass. A heavy, muscular tail whipped out from his spine, shattering the wooden frame of the jungle gym behind him. In less than 3 seconds, the trembling 4-year-old boy was gone. Standing in his place was a 10-foot-tall, juvenile Tyrannosaurus Rex. The playground fell into a deathly, suffocating silence. The mutated dog, which a moment ago had been the scariest thing in the park, suddenly whined. The dog's primitive brain registered what stood before it. This was not a human with a quirk. This was an apex predator. The dog tucked its tail between its legs and scrambled backward, desperate to flee. The green T-Rex's eyes snapped open. They were no longer the soft, wide eyes of a child. They were golden, slit-pupilled, and burned with a terrifying, primordial fury. Izuku opened his massive, blood-red maw, inhaling a volume of air that seemed to pull the leaves off the nearby trees. And then, the boy roared. It wasn't a sound. It was a physical force. The roar was a deep, chest-rattling bass that vibrated through the ground, shattering the glass of the nearby street lamps, and setting off car alarms 3 blocks away. It was a sound that had not been heard on Earth for millions of years. The undeniable proclamation of the Tyrant King. The dog didn't just run, it scrambled, terrified out of its mind, disappearing into the city and never returning. The T-Rex snapped its jaws shut, the sound like a steel vault slamming closed. Slowly, the massive beast turned its golden eyes downward, looking at Katsuki. Katsuki couldn't breathe. His heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. Every instinct inherited from his mammalian ancestors screamed at him to play dead, to hide, to prey. The dinosaur leaned down, its massive snout inches from Katsuki's face. Katsuki whimpered, a tear finally escaping his eye. Then, the monster did the most unexpected thing. It blinked, tilted its head in a distinctly canine manner of confusion, and then sneezed. A cloud of warm air and a little bit of green smoke puffed over Katsuki's face. The golden eyes softened into a familiar, worried emerald green. In a rapid, steaming contraction of flesh and bone, the beast shrank. The scales receded, the tail vanished, and suddenly, little Izuku Midoriya was sitting naked in the woodchips, crying hysterically, surrounded by the shredded remnants of his clothes. Keikaken! I'm as sorry! I ruined my shirt! Izuku wailed, rubbing his eyes. Katsuki just stared at the crying boy, his mind completely and utterly broken by the dichotomy of what he had just witnessed. From that day on, Katsuki Bakugo never once called Izuku Deku. He never pushed him down. He never stole his notebooks, because Katsuki knew the truth. Underneath that crying, muttering, nervous nerd, slept a god of destruction. Growing up was an isolating experience for Izuku. His quirk was officially registered as Tyrant King. It was classified as a transformation/mutation hybrid. Izuku could fully transform into a T-Rex, or he could partially manifest aspects of his quirk, summoning a heavy, scaly tail for balance, turning his skin into impenetrable reptilian armor, or shifting his hands into massive, 3-fingered claws capable of tearing through solid steel. Even in his base, human form, Izuku was permanently altered. By the time he was 14, he was tall, broad-shouldered, and densely packed with muscle. His canines were noticeably sharp, and patches of hardened, microscopic green scales permanently dusted his shoulders and forearms. Yet, internally, he was exactly the same. He was soft-spoken, hyper-analytical, deeply empathetic, and a massive hero nerd. He spent his classes furiously scribbling in his hero analysis for the future notebooks, muttering up a storm. But society didn't see the nerd. They saw a monster. At Aldera Junior High, the social hierarchy was bizarre. Izuku wasn't bullied in the traditional sense. Nobody dared. There was an unspoken, collective agreement among the student body to treat Izuku Midoriya like an unexploded bomb. They parted like the Red Sea when he walked down the hallways. When he sat down at the cafeteria, the tables around him emptied. People feared him. And to a boy whose only dream was to save people with a fearless smile like All Might, that fear was an agonizing, daily heartbreak. "All right, settle down," the homeroom teacher announced, tossing a stack of career aptitude tests onto his desk. "You're all third years now. It's time to start thinking seriously about your futures." "But who am I kidding? You're all aiming for the hero course." The classroom erupted into cheers, students showing off their quirks. Yes, you all have wonderful quirks," the teacher sighed. "But remember the rules against quirk usage in school. Now let's see. Bakugo, you're aiming for UA High, aren't you?" Katsuki leaned back in his chair, feet kicked up on his desk. He smirked confidently. "Damn right. I aced the mock tests. I'm the only one here with the raw power and the drive to make it into the top hero academy. I'm going to surpass All Might himself." "Oh, right," the teacher adjusted his glasses, looking at his clipboard. "Midoriya, you're also applying for UA, aren't you?" The classroom fell dead silent. The temperature seemed to drop. All eyes slowly shifted to the back corner of the room, where the large, green-haired teen was trying to make himself as small as possible behind his desk. Izuku swallowed hard, looking down at his scarred notebook. "Why, yes, sir. I'm applying for the hero course." Nobody laughed. Nobody mocked him. Instead, there was a collective, uneasy shift in the room. They couldn't imagine Izuku as a hero who rescued cats from trees or smiled for the cameras. They imagined him tearing villains limb from limb and painting the streets red. Katsuki slowly turned his head, his crimson eyes locking onto Izuku. Their rivalry was intensely complicated. Katsuki was prideful, arrogant, and aggressive. But he respected power, and he knew, deep down in his primal hindbrain, that if Izuku ever truly lost control, not even his explosions could stop him. "You better not get in my way, Midoriya," Katsuki warned, his voice low, lacking his usual explosive anger, replaced instead by a tense, calculated seriousness. "I'm not competing with you, Kaken," Izuku replied softly, meeting his gaze. I want to save people. In my own way." Katsuki clicked his tongue and looked away. When the final bell rang, Izuku packed his bag quickly, eager to escape the stifling atmosphere. He took a different route home today, hoping to clear his head. He walked through a dimly lit underpass, the shadows offering a brief respite from the glaring eyes of the public. He flipped through his notebook, looking at his sketch of Mount Lady. "If I can just master my hybrid form," he muttered to himself, "I could optimize my speed without sacrificing the collateral damage of my full mass. A 40% scale manifestation combined with leg enhancement could, a medium-sized meat shield, perfect." Izuku stopped dead in his tracks. His internal monologue ceased. The hair on the back of his neck stood up, and his nostrils flared. A foul, putrid scent assaulted his senses: sewage, rotting garbage, and something chemical. He turned around just as a massive wave of dark green, viscous sludge erupted from a manhole cover. The slime converged, forming a grotesque, amorphous face with two massive, rolling eyeballs and a jagged mouth. "Don't worry, kid," the sludge villain gurgled, lunging forward like a tidal wave. "I'm just going to hijack your body for a little bit. It'll only hurt for about 45 seconds. Izuku dropped his notebook. His instincts flared, but his human brain hesitated. "I can't fully transform here," he thought rapidly. "The tunnel is too small. My mass would collapse the structural supports. The street above would cave in." That split second of heroic hesitation was his undoing. The sludge slammed into him, wrapping around his arms, his legs, and forcing its way up his nose and into his mouth. The taste was unimaginable, a suffocating mixture of mud and rot. Wow, you're built like a tank, kid. The villain laughed, forcing himself deeper down Izuku's throat. This body is going to be perfect to hide from him. Izuku gagged, his vision swimming with dark spots. Panic set in. His body reacted defensively. Emerald scales instantly erupted across his arms and neck, tearing through his middle school uniform. His fingernails elongated into sharp, black talons. He blindly clawed at the sludge, his grip strong enough to crush concrete, but his claws simply swiped uselessly through the liquid villain. I can't breathe. I can't breathe. His golden, reptilian eyes began to dim. Was this it? Was he going to die here, suffocated in an alley, never having saved a single person? Suddenly, the manhole cover rattled violently. A massive, booming voice echoed through the tunnel, cutting through the darkness like a beacon of absolute certainty. Fear not, young man. For I am here, the sludge villain shrieked. A colossal figure burst from the manhole. Even with his vision fading, Izuku recognized the towering silhouette, the twin tufts of blonde hair, the shining white smile. All Might. Texas smash. All Might threw a right hook. He didn't even make contact with the villain. The sheer, overwhelming air pressure generated by the punch created a localized hurricane within the tunnel. The wind pressure caught the sludge villain, ripping his liquid body apart at a cellular level, tearing him away from Izuku's mouth and nose. Izuku collapsed onto his hands and knees, gasping violently for air. His scales immediately receded, his claws shrinking back into human fingernails. He coughed up a foul mouthful of sludge, his lungs burning. Are you all right, my boy? All Might asked, easily scooping the scattered remnants of the villain into 2 empty soda bottles he had magically produced from his pockets. Izuku looked up, his emerald eyes wide with absolute awe. It was him. It was really him. The symbol of peace. All Might. Izuku scrambled to his feet, ignoring the burning in his throat. I'm a huge fan. Thank you? Thank you so much. I need an autograph. Oh, my notebook. Izuku scrambled to find his notebook, opening it to a blank page, only to find that All Might had already signed it in massive, sprawling marker across 2 whole pages. Izuku bowed so fast and hard he nearly broke the sound barrier. Thank you? This will be a family heirloom. All Might laughed, a boisterous, echoing sound. Ha ha ha! You are very welcome. Now, I must be off. Justice waits for no man, and I need to get this villain to the police. All Might turned, crouching slightly, preparing to jump. Wait, Izuku thought. He's leaving? But I have so much to ask him. The question that had haunted him for 10 years bubbled to the surface. He needed to know. He needed the #1 hero to look at him and tell him the truth. Before his brain could catch up with his body, Izuku lunged forward, grabbing onto All Might's pant leg right as the hero launched himself into the stratosphere. The wind tore at Izuku's face, pulling his lips back in a comical grimace as the city of Muzidafu shrank below them. Hey! Hey! What are you doing? All Might yelled over the roaring wind, looking down in shock. Release me. Your fanaticism is too much. If I let go now, I'll die. Izuku screamed back, tears streaming from his eyes. Oh. Right. Good point. Hold on tightly. They landed with a heavy thud on the roof of a 3-story office building. Izuku instantly dropped to his hands and knees, kissing the concrete, trembling. Good grief, All Might sighed, wiping a sudden bead of sweat from his forehead. If you knock on the door downstairs, they will let you out. Now I really must go. Wait! Izuku shouted, pushing himself up. Please. Just one question. All Might paused, looking back over his massive shoulder. Izuku stared at his own hands. He willed a patch of scales to form over his knuckles, the green, reptilian armor shimmering in the afternoon sun. He looked up, his eyes filled with a desperate, crushing vulnerability. People look at me, and they see a monster. Izuku's voice cracked. My quirk, it's violent. It's terrifying. When I use it, people run away. They don't feel safe. They feel like prey. He clenched his fists, the scales digging into his palms. Even if my power is scary, even if I look like a beast, can I still be a hero? Can someone like me ever be a symbol of peace that makes people smile? For a moment, the rooftop was completely silent, save for the hum of the city below. All Might looked at the boy. He saw the sheer physical power hiding just beneath the surface of the boy's skin. But more importantly, he saw the deep, bleeding empathy in his eyes. But before All Might could answer, a sudden, sharp pain erupted in his side. Smoke began to billow from his body. No, All Might panicked internally. Not now. The time limit. Pro-heroes are always risking their lives, All Might forced out, his voice suddenly straining. It is a noble dream. But, you must be realistic. If your power terrifies the people you are trying to save, you must find a way to temper it. Being a hero is not just about defeating villains. It is about the heart. A thick cloud of steam engulfed the number one hero. Izuku coughed, waving the vapor away. I know it's about the heart. I just want to. Izuku trailed off, his jaw dropping. Standing where the towering god of muscle had just been was a skeletal, emaciated man with sunken eyes, wearing baggy clothes that hung off his frail frame like a scarecrow. What? Izuku shrieked, his eyes bulging. You deflated. You're an imposter. I assure you, kid, I am All Might, the skeletal man sighed, blood suddenly dripping from his mouth. He wiped it away casually. He slumped against the rooftop railing, sitting down heavily. You've seen my true form. You can't put this on the internet. Over the next few minutes, Toshinori Yagi explained the reality of his situation. The horrific injury he sustained 5 years ago. The missing stomach. The destroyed respiratory system. The 3-hour daily limit. Izuku listened in stunned silence, his analytical mind reeling. The symbol of peace was crumbling. So, to answer your question, kid, Toshinori said softly, looking out over the city. Can you be a hero with a terrifying power? Yes. But you have an uphill battle. The public is fickle. They want a shining knight, not a rampaging beast. If you want to be a hero, you have to work twice as hard to show them your humanity. Toshinori stood up, patting his pockets. Now I need to get this slime ball to the precinct. He stopped. His hollow eyes widened in horror. His pockets were empty. Far off in the distance, somewhere in the shopping district of the city, a massive, thunderous explosion shook the skyline. A plume of thick black smoke spiraled up into the evening sky. Toshinori clutched his side, his face paling. When the kid grabbed me, it must have fallen out. A villain attack? Izuku gasped, running to the railing. I have to go, Toshinori muttered, attempting to flex, but his body screamed in agony, refusing to transform. Damn it. I'm useless. He turned and ran for the stairwell. Izuku stood frozen on the roof for a moment. Then, his legs moved on their own. He sprinted after the skeletal hero, his heart pounding in his chest. Tatooine shopping district was a war zone. Fires raged out of control, licking the sides of the buildings. The air was thick with the smell of burning rubber, cracked concrete, and the sickly sweet stench of caramelized nitroglycerin. A massive crowd had formed, kept at bay by a hastily erected police blockade. Izuku pushed his way to the front of the crowd, gasping for breath. When he saw what was happening, his blood ran cold. The sludge villain had returned. But he was massive now, having absorbed the surrounding debris. And he had a hostage. Trapped within the swirling mass of suffocating slime was Katsuki Bakugo. Katsuki was fighting like a demon. He was thrashing, screaming, setting off massive explosions from his palms in a desperate attempt to break free. But the explosions only fueled the fire spreading through the street, and the sludge simply reformed around him, slipping down his throat, drowning him in mud. His quirk is too volatile. Death Arm shouted, holding his arms up to shield his face from the heat. I can't get close. My wood will catch fire instantly. Kamui Woods yelled, hanging from a nearby light pole. Where are the fire trucks? Empty Lady was stuck at the entrance of the street. I need at least a 2-lane road to get through here. I'm sorry, I can't fit. The heroes were doing nothing. They were just watching. Izuku looked around frantically. Where was All Might? He spotted the skeletal blonde man gripping a telephone pole near the back of the crowd, clutching his side, his face twisted in absolute agony and self-loathing. He can't transform, Izuku realized. He's out of time. Izuku looked back at the villain. Katsuki's face broke the surface of the sludge for a split second. Their eyes met. Katsuki wasn't glaring. He wasn't arrogant. His crimson eyes were wide, bloodshot, and filled with a desperate, silent plea for help. He's going to die, Izuku thought, his mind going terrifyingly blank. They are going to let him die. Something snapped inside Izuku Midoriya. It wasn't just the heroic drive to save a life. It was a darker, more ancient instinct. The instinct of an apex predator watching a lesser creature claim territory that didn't belong to it. Before his conscious mind could even process his actions, Izuku vaulted over the police barricade. Hey! Kids, stop! Get back here! Death Arms screamed. Izuku didn't listen. He sprinted straight into the inferno. He threw his backpack, the heavy canvas hitting the sludge villain directly in the eye. The villain flinched, pulling back just enough for Katsuki to gasp for a lungful of smoky air. You! The sludge villain roared, his watery eyes narrowing as he recognized the boy. You're the brat from the tunnel. You've got some nerve coming back here, Deku? Katsuki coughed, his voice ragged. What the hell are you doing, my legs? Izuku whispered, tears streaming down his face as he desperately clawed at the sludge with his bare, human hands. My legs just moved on their own. I'll crush you! The villain roared, raising a massive, tree-trunk-sized tendril of solidifying mud, preparing to smash the fragile teenager into paste. Midoriya! Death Arms yelled, lunging forward, knowing he wouldn't be fast enough. Tashinori watched in horror. He's going to die because of my mistake. I'm pathetic. No, Izuku thought, the tears stopping instantly as the shadow of the sludge tendril fell over him. I won't let him die. I don't care if they think I'm a monster. If being a monster saves Kaken, then I will be the most terrifying monster in the world. Izuku stopped clawing at the sludge. He planted his feet firmly onto the asphalt, taking a deep, shuddering breath. Then, the world seemed to stop. Crack! The sound of Izuku's spine elongating echoed over the roar of the fire like a gunshot. The transformation was instantaneous, violent, and utterly awe-inspiring. A massive blast of displaced air exploded outward from Izuku's position, knocking the sludge villain's tendril off course. The shockwave shattered the remaining windows of the shopping district, and blew the flames backward. The crowd screamed. The heroes froze. Standing in the center of the street was no longer a crying, freckled teenager. Eclipsing the alleyway, standing over 20 feet tall at the hip and measuring 40 feet from snout to tail, was a fully grown, adult Tyrannosaurus Rex. Its scales were a deep, iridescent emerald green, heavily armored with thick, osteoderm-plated ridges running down its spine. Its massive, muscular thighs ended in three-toed, scythe-like talons that dug deeply into the asphalt, cracking the street beneath its sheer weight. But it was the head that drew everyone's horrified gaze. The skull was over 5 feet long, a biomechanical marvel of pure, unadulterated crushing power. The golden, slit-pupiled eyes locked onto the sludge villain with a cold, predatory intelligence. What the hell is that? The sludge villain shrieked, his amorphous body trembling. The Tyrant King didn't answer with words. Izuku unhinged his jaw. The roar that tore from his throat defied description. It was a concussive blast of sheer audio violence. It was a roar that commanded absolute obedience. The sound waves visibly rippled through the air, completely extinguishing the surrounding fires in a localized vacuum of pressure. The ground shook so violently that several police officers lost their footing and fell to the pavement. Katsuki, still half-trapped in the sludge, felt the roar vibrate through his teeth. He felt that familiar, primal terror wash over him, but this time, it wasn't directed at him. Izuku lunged. He didn't punch. He didn't use a flashy super move. He utilized the raw, devastating perfection of millions of years of evolution. The sludge villain tried to whip a tendril at Izuku's eyes. Izuku merely lowered his massive, armored skull, taking the hit against his thick scales without even blinking. He closed the distance in a fraction of a second. Izuku opened his jaws and bit down directly onto the center mass of the sludge villain. The bite force of a Tyrannosaurus Rex is estimated to be over 12,000 pounds per square inch. But with Izuku's Quirk mutation, bolstered by human adrenaline, it was exponentially higher. When Izuku's jaws snapped shut, the air pressure inside the villain's liquid body had nowhere to go. It was like stomping on a ketchup packet with a combat boot. Boom! The sludge villain literally exploded. The concussive force of the bite obliterated the villain's gelatinous structure, scattering mud and slime across a 3-block radius. The villain's eyes rolled back, knocked entirely unconscious by the sheer kinetic shockwave. As the sludge rained down like a filthy monsoon, Katsuki fell freely through the air. Before he could hit the pavement, a massive, scaly snout gently nudged him, catching him softly against a bed of surprisingly smooth green scales. The street was utterly, terrifyingly silent. The villain was defeated in a single, devastating second. Izuku stood tall, panting heavily, plumes of hot steam shooting from his massive nostrils. He slowly lowered his head, gently depositing Katsuki onto the unbroken asphalt. The golden, reptilian eyes looked at Katsuki. Then, the massive T-Rex blinked, and a small, distinct whine rumbled in the back of its throat, a sound of genuine concern. Katsuki looked up at the terrifying beast, covered in soot and slime. He gritted his teeth, forcing himself to his feet. He didn't run. He didn't cower. "I didn't need your help, you giant green nerd," Katsuki growled, his voice shaking just a fraction. The T-Rex let out a huff of air that sounded suspiciously like a laugh. Suddenly, a cloud of green smoke enveloped the dinosaur. The massive silhouette shrank inward, condensing back into a human form. When the smoke cleared, Izuku was standing there, his school uniform shredded to ribbons, barefoot, and exhausted. He swayed on his feet, giving Katsuki a weak, wobbly thumbs up before collapsing face first onto the pavement. The crowd remained frozen for another 5 seconds. Then, Empty Lady slowly lowered her hands. "Holy crap," she whispered. The silence broke. The crowd didn't cheer, not immediately. They murmured, pointing at the unconscious boy. The pro-heroes rushed in, securing the unconscious sludge villain, and immediately calling for paramedics. In the back of the crowd, Toshinori Yagi stood absolutely motionless. He hadn't just witnessed a display of immense power. He had witnessed a boy who had deliberately embraced his own monstrosity, ignoring the judgment of society, throwing away his own safety, entirely for the sake of saving one life. Toshinori placed a hand over the scar on his chest. His heart, which had felt so heavy and hopeless just an hour ago, was suddenly beating with a frantic, renewed rhythm. I told him to be realistic, Toshinori thought, a profound sense of shame washing over him. I told him he had to prove his humanity. But he just proved that a true hero isn't defined by the shape of his body. He is defined by the shape of his soul. Toshinori clenched his fist. I have found him. Miles away from Yuzurifu, buried deep beneath the earth in a sterile, life support-equipped bunker, a man sat in a leather chair. His face was a ruined landscape of scar tissue above the upper lip, completely devoid of eyes, a nose, or hair. He was hooked up to an array of breathing tubes and intravenous strips. This was the Demon King of the underworld. This was All for One. A tall man made entirely of purple mist, Kurogyri, stood nearby, observing a bank of monitors. The screens were broadcasting the news coverage of the Tatooine District incident. Grainy cell phone footage of a massive, green T-Rex obliterating the sludge villain looped on the central screen. Fascinating, All for One rasped, his voice a dry, echoing wheeze. A remarkable transformation quirk. The sheer kinetic output is impressive. Who is the boy? The local registry lists him as Izuku Midoriya, Kurogyri replied smoothly. Quirk, Tyrant King. It is classified as an ancient mutation. Ancient, All for One mused, tapping a finger against the armrest. I have accumulated thousands of quirks over the last century, Kurogyri. I have woven the tapestry of human evolution into my very being. I am the pinnacle of progress. But I have never bothered to steal something so primitive. Perhaps it would make a fine addition to the Noma project. Isolate the audio of his roar from the broadcast. Let me hear the boy. Yes, master. Kurogyri adjusted the console. The grainy footage played again, this time with the audio enhanced. On the screen, the green T-Rex threw its head back. The roar played through the bunker's high-fidelity speakers. The moment the sound waves hit All for One, something impossible happened. The Demon King flinched. It wasn't a conscious movement. It was a violent, full-body spasm. Deep within his stitched-together, corrupted soul, the thousands of stolen quirks suddenly shrieked in unison. For the first time in over 100 years, All for One felt a cold, paralyzing spike of adrenaline shoot through his veins. His heart monitor, which had maintained a steady, slow rhythm for decades, suddenly spiked wildly, beeping in a frantic, panicked crescendo. All for One gripped the armrests of his chair so tightly the leather tore. He was hyperventilating, his ruined chest heaving. He couldn't breathe. His hindbrain, a remnant of a time before quirks, before society, before anything, was screaming at him. Predator. Hide. Predator. Prey. Master! Kurogiri rushed forward, his misty form swirling in alarm. Are you all right? Your vitals are plummeting. All for One held up a shaking hand, forcing himself to take a deep, rattling breath through his life support mask. He forced his erratic heartbeat back under control through sheer force of will, but his hands continued to tremble. I am fine, All for One wheezed, his voice laced with genuine shock. He looked toward the monitor, though he had no eyes. What is that boy? A middle school student, master. All for One leaned back, the feeling of cold dread clinging to him like a second skin. He, a god among men, had just been reduced to a frightened animal by a sound recording. It was unacceptable. It was an anomaly. Keep an eye on Izuku Midoriya, All for One commanded, his voice hardening into a dark, obsessive resolve. I want to know everything about him. I want to know how his quirk functions. I want to know what makes him tick. All for One steepled his fingers, the terror slowly morphing into a cold, clinical anger. And when the time is right, I am going to take that power for myself. I will not tolerate anything in this world that makes me feel like prey. The sunset painted the streets of Mizurufu in deep oranges and purples as Izuku finally walked home. The aftermath of the sludge incident had been entirely predictable. The pro-heroes had scolded him mercilessly for his recklessness, lecturing him about the dangers of using his quirk without a license, emphasizing the collateral damage his massive form could cause. But begrudgingly, they had praised his bravery. Katsuki had simply huffed, kicked a rock at Izuku's shin, and told him to stop acting like a suicidal idiot before storming off. For Katsuki, that was practically a tearful hug. Izuku dragged his feet, his body aching in places he didn't know he had places. Transforming fully took a massive toll on his caloric reserves. He felt like he could eat an entire cow. I am here! Izuku jumped, nearly shifting his arms into claws on instinct. All Might slid out from an alleyway in his muscular form, striking a heroic pose, before instantly violently coughing up blood and deflating back into his skeletal form. All Might! Izuku gasped, rushing over. Are you okay? I am fine, my boy, Toshinori coughed, wiping his mouth with a handkerchief. He straightened his posture, looking at Izuku with an intensity that made the boy shrink back. I came here to apologize to you, young Midoriya, Toshinori said, bowing his head slightly. Apologize? To me? Izuku stammered, waving his hands frantically. No! I should apologize. I grabbed your leg, I made you drop the villain, I got in the way. You didn't get in the way, Toshinori interrupted softly. You acted when the rest of us were paralyzed by our own limitations. The pros, the police, even myself, we all stood and watched. Only you, a quirkless, a timid, frightened teenager, had the courage to step into the fire. Toshinori stepped closer, looking up at the boy. Earlier today, you asked me if a monster could be a hero. You asked if you could be a symbol of peace despite the terrifying nature of your power. Izuku held his breath, his emerald eyes wide. I told you to be realistic, Toshinori continued, a small, genuine smile forming on his skeletal face. I was wrong. Top heroes have stories about them from their school days. Most of their stories have one thing in common. Their bodies moved before they had a chance to think. Tears immediately welled in Izuku's eyes. He fell to his knees, clutching his chest. That was true for you today, wasn't it? Toshinori asked. Why yes, Izuku sobbed, the dam finally breaking. 10 years of isolation, of being feared, of being treated like an unexploded bomb, washed away in the presence of his idol. You have a power that strikes fear into the hearts of men, Toshinori said, his voice echoing in the quiet street. But today, you used that fear to protect the weak. You didn't fight like a monster. You fought like a protector. You can become a hero, Izuku Midoriya, Izuku cried, bowing his head to the pavement, his massive, scarred shoulders shaking with the force of his sobs. Toshinori watched him, his smile widening. You are worthy to inherit my power. Izuku's crying stopped instantly. He slowly lifted his head, a long string of snot hanging from his nose, his face a mask of utter confusion. Huh, my quirk, Toshinori explained, pointing a bony finger at himself. It is a sacred torch passed from generation to generation. It is called One for All. And I want you to be my successor. Izuku stared at him. He blinked once. Twice. He looked down at his own hands, which were currently dusted with microscopic green scales, and then back up to All Might. Wait, Izuku said, his hyperanalytical brain instantly rebooting, wiping away the emotional moment. You want to give your super strength quirk to me? Yes. Toshinori beamed. But... Izuku pointed a thumb at himself. I already weigh nearly 8 tons when I transform. I have a bite force that can shatter concrete. If you give me a strength-enhancing quirk on top of my biological mutation, won't my muscles literally tear themselves off my skeleton? Or worse, won't I accidentally vaporize a city block every time I take a step? Toshinori froze. He stood there for a long, silent moment. The wind blew a stray piece of trash across the street. I did not think of that, Toshinori admitted, his face paling slightly as he visualized a 40-foot T-Rex equipped with One for All. It was an apocalyptic thought. Also, Izuku muttered, pulling a tiny, ruined notebook from his pocket, if your quirk is an accumulation of power, and my quirk fundamentally alters my DNA and skeletal structure, the vestigial clash alone could cause spontaneous cellular degradation. Okay, stop muttering. Toshinori laughed, holding up his hands. Perhaps you are right. Perhaps adding my power to your impressive physiology would be a bit overkill. Toshinori walked over, placing a gentle hand on Izuku's shoulder. But my offer of mentorship stands, young Midoriya, Toshinori said warmly. You have the power of a god, but the heart of a child. If you go to UA High without learning how to control that beast inside you, you will break yourself, and others. Let me train you. Let me teach you how to smile through the terrifying visage you wear. Let me help you become the apex hero this world needs. Izuku looked up at the skeletal man. For the first time in his life, he didn't feel like a freak. He didn't feel like a monster. He felt like a hero in training. Izuku wiped his eyes, a determined, fierce fire igniting in his emerald gaze. He stood up tall, his shadow stretching long against the setting sun. Yes, sir, Izuku said firmly. I accept. Far away, in the dark, the Demon King shivered in his sleep, dreaming of green scales and golden eyes. The reign of the tyrant had begun. Dagoba Municipal Beach Park was less of a beach and more of a monument to societal apathy. Decades of illegal dumping had transformed the pristine coastline into a jagged, rusted labyrinth of discarded appliances, rotting furniture, and twisted metal. It was an environmental disaster. To Toshinori Yagi, it was the perfect classroom. The morning sun had barely crested the horizon, painting the smoggy sky in hues of bruised purple and weak orange. The air smelled of salt, rust, and the metallic tang of old Freon. Crunch. The deafening sound of violently collapsing metal echoed across the shoreline. Ah! Bother, Izuku Midoriya muttered, his voice a deep, resonant rumble that vibrated within his chest. Toshinori, sitting in his skeletal form atop a rusted refrigerator, took a slow sip from his thermos of hot green tea. That is the 4th washing machine this morning, young Midoriya. You are supposed to be moving the trash, not compressing it into modern art. I know. I'm sorry! Izuku panicked, his arms waving frantically. The problem was not Izuku's lack of effort. The problem was his current state of being. Izuku was currently holding what was known as his 30% hybrid form. At 15 years old, his base human form was already remarkably built, standing at a solid 5'10", with broad shoulders and dense, coiled musculature. But in his hybrid state, his biology forcefully bridged the gap between man and prehistoric apex predator. He was nearly 7 feet tall. Thick, iridescent emerald scales armored his shoulders, chest, forearms, and shins. His legs had shifted slightly into a digitigrade stance, giving him a slight forward hunch, balanced perfectly by the thick, muscular, 5-foot-long reptilian tail swishing nervously behind him. His hands were massive, ending in 3 thick fingers tipped with dense, black talons. His jaw was slightly elongated, revealing rows of sharp, interlocking teeth. He looked like a terrifying, bipedal dragon ripped straight from a dark fantasy novel. And right now, this terrifying monster was looking at a flattened washing machine with an expression of profound, tearful dismay, furiously muttering to himself. "My center of gravity is off," Izuku whispered rapidly, his golden, slit-pupiled eyes darting back and forth. "The kinetic output of my triceps in this state is roughly 600% higher than a standard human. I applied what I thought was 3 pounds of pressure, but my tactile feedback is dampened by the dermal armor of my scales. I need to recalibrate my proprioception. If I was rescuing a civilian trapped under rubble, and I gripped them with this much force, I would shatter their clavicle, puncture their lungs, and—" "Breathe, Izuku," Toshinori interrupted gently, hopping down from the refrigerator. Izuku snapped his jaws shut with a metallic clack, his tail drooping dejectedly. Toshinori walked over, examining the crushed washing machine. The metal had been folded in on itself like origami. It was a terrifying display of casual, effortless power. "When we began this training 10 months ago," Toshinori said, looking up at his student, "I told you that our goal was not to make you stronger. Your Quirk, Tyrant King, already grants you more raw physical power than almost any pro-hero in the top 50. If strength were the only metric of a hero, you would already be a master." Toshinori poked Izuku's chest. His bony finger tapped against the diamond-hard green scales. "But strength without control is just violence," Toshinori continued, his hollow blue eyes serious. "A hero's touch must be gentle enough to hold a newborn infant, but firm enough to catch a falling skyscraper. You have spent your entire life suppressing your quirk because you were afraid of it. Now you are trying to use it like a tool. But it is not a tool, Izuku. It is your body. You must stop thinking of the beast as a separate entity." Izuku looked down at his clawed hands. "But how? When I transform, the adrenaline, the instincts, it's overwhelming. My brain wants to hunt. It wants to crush things. And your heart wants to save people," Toshinori countered softly. "Which is stronger?" Izuku didn't hesitate. "My heart." "Then let your heart steer the beast." Toshinori smiled, a warm, paternal expression. "Try again. And this time, try to smile. A symbol of peace must reassure the public that everything is all right." Izuku took a deep breath. He approached a rusted, massive double-door refrigerator. He planted his digitigrade feet into the sand. He consciously relaxed his jaw, forcing his sharp teeth into what he hoped was a reassuring grin. He looked horrifying. It was a predator's grin, the kind of smile a shark gives before it bites a seal in half. Toshinori winced internally. Note to self: teach him to smile with his eyes, not his teeth. Izuku reached out. He closed his eyes, focusing entirely on the tactile sensation beneath his talons. He felt the cold, brittle metal. He engaged his muscles, not with the explosive power of a strike, but with the steady, measured hydraulic lift of an elevator. "Gentle," Izuku chanted in his mind. "Gentle. Gentle." With a groan of shifting sand, the 500-pound refrigerator lifted smoothly into the air. The metal didn't buckle. The frame didn't bend. Izuku held it above his head effortlessly, his tail swishing behind him in a slow, controlled rhythm to maintain perfect balance. "Excellent!" Toshinori cheered, clapping his hands. "Now carry it to the truck." Izuku beamed, a genuine flush of pride warming his scaled cheeks. He turned and marched across the beach, his heavy footsteps leaving deep, three-toed impressions in the wet sand. For 10 agonizing months, this was Izuku's life. He didn't lift weights. He performed exercises in micro-control. He picked up raw eggs in his hybrid form without breaking them. He practiced his sprint, learning how to use his powerful tail as a counterbalance to navigate sharp corners at highway speeds without destroying the pavement. He learned how to shift specific parts of his body, summoning just the scales on his forearm to block, or shifting his vocal cords to let out a highly concentrated, directional roar that could shatter glass without deafening the people behind him. By the morning of the UA entrance exam, Dagoba Beach was spotless. The horizon glowed over the pristine ocean waves. Izuku stood on the seawall, back in his human form, wearing his middle school uniform. He was breathing heavily, his clothes drenched in sweat, but his eyes were bright, focused, and utterly devoid of the fearful hesitation that had plagued his childhood. "You did it, young Midoriya," Toshinori said, standing tall in his muscular all-might form, his cape billowing in the ocean breeze. "You have conquered your own strength. You have tamed the beast." Izuku looked at his hands. They were calloused, slightly scarred, and a faint tint of olive green beneath the skin. "I'm ready," Izuku whispered. "Go forth, young man." All Might boomed, pointing toward the city. "Show the world the heart of the true Tyrant King." The UA High School campus was an architectural marvel, an imposing fortress of glass and steel shaped like a massive H. To Izuku Midoriya, it looked like the gates of Olympus. He walked up the paved pathway, his heart hammering against his ribs. The sheer density of people was staggering. Hundreds of teenagers, all possessing spectacular quirks, all vying for a fraction of a chance to become heroes. Izuku nervously tugged at the collar of his uniform. Because his quirk fundamentally altered his skeletal density and muscle mass even in his base form, his uniform was incredibly tight across his chest and shoulders. He felt like a coiled spring shoved inside a cardboard box. "Out of my way, Deku." Izuku stopped. He didn't flinch, nor did he shrink into himself like he used to. He simply turned his head. Katsuki Bakugo walked past him, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, his red eyes glaring forward. The malice, the venom that had defined their childhood interactions, was gone. It had been entirely incinerated on the day of the sludge villain incident. Now, there was only a tense, simmering rivalry. "Morning, Kaken," Izuku replied evenly, his voice naturally deep. Katsuki paused for a fraction of a second, side-eyeing Izuku's broad shoulders. Katsuki clicked his tongue, a small spark popping off his thumb inside his pocket. "Don't hold back today, you giant green nerd. If you fail the exam, I'll kick your ass." "I'm not going to fail," Izuku stated, not as a boast, but as a simple, peer-reviewed fact. Katsuki huffed, marching forward into the building. Izuku let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. He took a step forward, his mind already racing with tactical scenarios for the exam. "If it's a written test followed by a physical demonstration, I should probably stick to a 20% manifestation. Anything more will cause unnecessary property damage and lower my score in a controlled environment." His right foot caught the edge of an uneven paving stone. Because Izuku had spent the last 10 months heavily utilizing his tail for perfect, gyroscopic balance, his purely human form's center of gravity occasionally betrayed him. Time seemed to slow down as Izuku pitched forward. "Oh no. I'm going to faceplant at the gates of UA. I'm going to die of embarrassment before I even take the test." He braced for the impact, instinctively preparing to summon scales to protect his nose, but the impact never came. Instead, a profound sense of weightlessness washed over him. Izuku found himself suspended in midair, floating parallel to the ground like a poorly designed parade balloon. "Are you okay?" Izuku rotated his eyes upward. Standing next to him was a girl with round, rosy cheeks, warm brown eyes, and a bob of chestnut hair. She had one hand raised, her fingers pressed together. "I used my quirk on you." "Sorry for not asking first," she smiled, pressing her hands together. "Release." Gravity instantly reasserted its dominance over Izuku's heavy frame. He dropped the remaining 2 feet, catching himself easily on his hands and knees. But it would be bad luck to fall right before the exam, right?" She chuckled nervously. Izuku scrambled to his feet, his face turning the color of a ripe tomato. This was a girl. A very cute, very nice girl who had just spoken to him. He realized his mind was entirely blank. Yes. Luck. Thank you? Gravity. Wow. Izuku stammered, bowing so deeply and rapidly he created a small gust of wind. The girl blinked, entirely unbothered by his massive, intimidating stature. She noticed the rough, slightly green tint to his knuckles where the scales lay dormant. "Whoa, your hands are so cool. They look super strong. What's your quirk?" Izuku blue-screened. "She thinks they're cool. She doesn't think I'm a monster. D-dinosaur." Izuku blurted out eloquently. The girl laughed, a bright, bubbly sound. "Dinosaur?" That's awesome. I'm Ochiko Uraraka. Well, let's both do our best, okay, Dinosaur-kun? She waved happily, turning and jogging toward the auditorium. Izuku stood frozen for another 10 seconds, his heart soaring into the stratosphere. I talked to a girl, and she didn't run away. I'm going to marry her. No, focus Izuku, focus. The exam. 30 minutes later, Izuku found himself seated in the massive, dimly lit orientation auditorium. Katsuki was seated to his left, violently bored. On the brightly lit stage, the voice hero, Present Mike, was attempting to hype up the crowd with the enthusiasm of a caffeinated radio DJ. Welcome to my live show, everybody say hey. Mike screamed. Silence echoed across the room. Present Mike didn't miss a beat. Tough crowd. Listen up, examinees. We're gonna be tossing you into 10-minute mock urban battles. You'll be facing off against 3 types of faux villains, the 1-pointer, the 2-pointer, and the 3-pointer. Use your quirks to rack up points. Izuku immediately opened a fresh notebook, his pen flying across the page at Mach speed. Robots? He muttered under his breath, his analytical brain immediately engaging. That's advantageous. I don't have to hold back my bite force. The structural integrity of a robot is purely mechanical, lacking a pain response. However, if I use my full mass, I'll create localized tremors that could destabilize other examinees. I need to maintain a strict 40% hybrid form. High agility, medium mass. The tail will be my primary blunt force weapon, preserving my claws for precision dismantling of hydraulic lines and power cores. Excuse me, sir. A loud, booming voice cut through the auditorium. A tall boy with glasses and an incredibly stiff, militaristic posture stood up from his seat, pointing directly at Present Mike. On the handout, there are clearly 4 types of villains. If this is a misprint, then UA, the most prominent academy in Japan, should be ashamed. The boy then whipped his body around, pointing a stiff, accusatory finger directly at Izuku. And you, in the back. The boy scolded loudly. With the intimidating aura and the constant, distracting muttering. This is no place for thugs to loiter. If you cannot take this seriously, leave at once. The entire auditorium turned to look at Izuku. A year ago, Izuku would have burst into tears and hid under his desk. But Izuku had spent the last 10 months staring down the #1 hero in combat drills. He had mastered his own mind. He knew who he was. Izuku stopped writing. He slowly closed his notebook, the sound a sharp snap in the quiet room. He didn't slouch. He sat up perfectly straight, his broad shoulders filling out the space of his seat. He looked directly at the boy with glasses. Izuku didn't say a word. But the primal, prehistoric energy sleeping beneath his skin reacted to the confrontation. The air around Izuku seemed to grow heavy. His emerald eyes locked onto the boy, and for a fraction of a second, his pupils narrowed into thin, reptilian slits. It was a look that communicated a single, biological fact. I am the apex predator in this room. The boy with glasses froze midpoint. The blood drained from his face. A bead of sweat rolled down his temple. His instincts screamed at him that he had just poked a sleeping dragon. I apologize for my outburst, the boy stammered rapidly, sitting down so fast his chair rattled. Katsuki snorted loudly, covering his mouth to hide a vicious, approving smirk. All right, settle down. Present Mike interjected, wiping imaginary sweat from his brow. Examinee 7111 has a point. The 4th villain is the 0-pointer. It's a massive obstacle. It has no points, so my advice is to run away from it. Now, go get changed and head to your designated battle centers. Plus Ultra. Battle Center B was a breathtaking feat of engineering. It was a massive, walled-off replica of a functioning city district, complete with high-rise buildings, functioning traffic lights, and paved streets. A crowd of examinees stood nervously before the massive metal gates. Izuku stood near the back, stretching his arms. He wore a dark green, heavily reinforced sleeveless compression shirt and durable combat pants. He spotted Uraraka near the front, looking incredibly nervous, taking deep breaths. He also spotted the boy with glasses, who was currently doing an aggressive routine of lunges. All right, Izuku thought, closing his eyes. Time to let him out. Just a little bit. Izuku took a deep breath. He visualized the lock inside his DNA, the ancient gatekeeper of his power. He reached out and twisted it open exactly 40%. The transformation was silent but deeply visceral. The temperature around Izuku plummeted as his biology shifted. His skin rippled, and a wave of thick, diamond-hard emerald scales swept across his neck, shoulders, forearms, and calves. His jaw elongated slightly, his teeth sharpening into a terrifying, serrated smile. His fingernails darkened and thickened, extending into 3-inch, razor-sharp talons. But the most dramatic change was his posture. His spine popped, his hips shifting as a massive, 5-foot-long, heavily armored tail violently erupted from his tailbone, the heavy muscles flexing instantly to catch his weight. He dropped into a slight forward crouch, his digitigrade legs coiled like massive, hydraulic springs. The examinees nearest to him instinctively backed away, their eyes wide with shock and a primal, shivering fear. "Whoa, what is that?" someone whispered. "He looks like a monster." Izuku ignored them. He kept his golden, slit-pupiled eyes locked entirely on the gates. He wasn't a monster. He was a hero. And heroes scored points. "Start!" Present Mick's voice boomed from the hidden speakers. Most of the examinees hesitated, confused by the lack of a countdown. Izuku didn't. Bang! The asphalt beneath Izuku's feet shattered into a spiderweb of cracks as he launched himself forward. To the onlookers, he didn't even run. He practically teleported. At 40%, Izuku possessed the terrifying agility of a velociraptor scaled up to a massive, muscular frame. He cleared the gate in less than a second, diving deep into the concrete jungle. "What are you waiting for?" Mike screamed over the speakers. "There are no countdowns in real battles. The hybrid kid has already scored." In the observation room hidden high above the arenas, a wall of massive screens displayed the chaos of the exams. The faculty of UA watched intently in the dark room, illuminated only by the glow of the monitors. "Interesting crop this year," the heroine Midnight purred, crossing her arms. "Look at the explosion boy in Arena A. Raw destructive power. A bit chaotic but effective," the cement hero, Cementas, nodded. In the center of the room, seated in a high-backed leather chair, a small, white, bear-mouse dog creature sipped a cup of Darjeeling tea. Principal Nisa's beady black eyes darted across the screens. "Look at Monitor 4 in Battle Center B," a tired, drawling voice commanded from the back corner. Shota Aizawa, the Erasure hero, leaned forward, his bloodshot eyes unblinking. All eyes turned to Monitor 4. On the screen, a group of 3 two-pointer robots were rolling down a main avenue, their mechanical heads swiveling as they locked onto targets. Suddenly, a green blur dropped from the side of a 3-story building. Izuku landed perfectly in the center of the robots, his heavy tail acting as a counterbalance to absorb the kinetic shock of the fall. He didn't roar. He didn't blindly rage. He moved with surgical, terrifying precision. The first robot swung a metal arm at him. Izuku ducked beneath the swing with impossible flexibility, his tail whipping around. The heavily armored appendage struck the robot's tracks with the force of a wrecking ball, instantly snapping the reinforced axles and sending the machine crashing to the ground. Without pausing, Izuku used the momentum of his tail whip to pivot his body. He lunged at the second robot, his clawed hands flashing out. Instead of punching the armor, his talons found the microscopic gaps in the robot's neck plating. With a sickening screech of tearing metal, Izuku effortlessly snipped the main hydraulic lines and ripped out the primary optic sensor. The robot short-circuited and collapsed. The third robot fired a rubber missile at his back. Izuku didn't even dodge. The missile struck his scaled shoulder blade and simply bounced off, the impact completely negated by his dermal armor. Izuku spun around, his powerful legs launching him into the air. He landed directly on top of the robot's head, his combined weight and downward momentum crushing the machine into a pancake of sparking wires and shattered steel. 3 villains. 6 points. 4 seconds. The observation room was dead silent. "Good heavens," Nisa whispered, lowering his teacup. "What an utterly fascinating display." "He's terrifying," the hero snipe noted, adjusting his mask. "Look at the aggression. It's like watching a nature documentary." "No, look closer," Aizawa corrected, a rare, genuine smile forming on his scruffy face. He isn't fighting like a wild animal. He's fighting like a tactician inside a monster's body. He's targeting the mechanical joints, the sensory arrays, the propulsion systems. He isn't wasting energy smashing the thickest armor. He's performing vivisections on moving targets. And look at his situational awareness, the space hero, 13, pointed out. He's deliberately drawing the robots away from the other examinees. When that missile hit him, he angled his body so the ricochet went straight up into the air, away from the students down the street. He's hyper-aware of his surroundings. All Might, standing in his skeletal form near the back wall, clenched his fists, a massive grin splitting his face. Show them, my boy. Show them the king. Down in the arena, Izuku was a green phantom of destruction. He was in the zone. The world had distilled into pure sensory input. He could smell the ozone of charging lasers, hear the metallic grinding of gears 3 blocks away, and feel the vibrations of heavy treads through the soles of his feet. 54 points, Izuku calculated in his head, leaping off a street lamp and tearing the head off a one-pointer with his teeth. The average cutoff is usually around 40, but I need a buffer in case of a curve. I should aim for 70. He landed smoothly, shaking the oil from his jaw. The examinees around him had stopped fighting entirely. They were simply following in his wake, picking off the stragglers he left behind, watching in absolute awe as the terrifying lizard boy dismantled the entire testing arena by himself. Ida Tenya, the boy with glasses, stood paralyzed at the end of an alleyway, watching Izuku dismantle a three-pointer with his bare hands. I called him a thug, Ida thought, deeply ashamed. But his movements, there is zero wasted energy. He evaluates the threat, neutralizes it, and immediately moves to secure the area. He possesses the instincts of a master martial artist. 6 minutes left. Mick's voice echoed. In the observation room, Nisa set his tea down. Well, the applicants have performed admirably. They have proven their ability to handle standard threats. But true heroism is not tested in the face of the expected. Nisa reached out, his paw hovering over a large, glowing red button encased in glass on the control console. Let us see how they react to the impossible. Nisa smiled, slamming his paw down. 4. The Tyrant and the Titan. A deep, unnatural tremor rumbled through Battle Center B. Izuku stopped mid-stride. His reptilian ears twitched. The vibration wasn't the rhythmic thud of a two-pointer or the heavy grinding of a three-pointer. This was massive. The ground was groaning beneath a colossal weight. Down the main thoroughfare, the buildings suddenly exploded outward. A gargantuan shadow fell over the mock city. Towering above the highest rooftops, casting the street into sudden darkness, was a machine of apocalyptic proportions. It was a humanoid tank, easily the size of a skyscraper, covered in thick, gunmetal gray armor plating. Its single, massive red eye glowed with an ominous, mechanical fury. The zero-pointer. With a slow, groaning swing, the massive machine slammed its fist into a nearby high-rise. The building shattered like glass, sending massive chunks of concrete, rebar, and glass raining down onto the streets below. A massive cloud of dust and debris swept through the avenue. "Our run!" An examinee screamed, dropping his gear and sprinting in the opposite direction. "It's the zero-pointer! Get out of here!" Ida yelled, turning and ordering the other students to retreat. Izuku stood frozen in the dust cloud. His analytical brain immediately assessed the situation. 0 points. Massive physical risk. The logical course of action is to retreat. The objective of the test is to survive and score points. He turned to run, but as the dust settled slightly, his enhanced hearing picked up a sound that made his blood freeze. "Ow, help my leg." Izuku snapped his head around. Through the haze of concrete dust, roughly 50 yards away, directly in the path of the advancing mechanical titan, was Uraraka. Her leg was pinned entirely beneath a massive slab of concrete rubble from the destroyed building. She was struggling desperately, trying to use her quirk on the rubble, but she was exhausted, and the slab was too heavy to push off herself. The zero-pointer raised its massive, metallic foot, a shadow falling directly over the trapped girl. Ida saw her. He stopped running, his eyes widening in horror. But he was too far away. His quirk engine could get him there, but he wouldn't have the strength to move the rubble and save her in time. Uraraka looked up at the descending shadow of the mechanical foot, tears streaming down her face. She closed her eyes. Thump! A heartbeat echoed in Izuku Midoriya's chest. It was so loud he felt it in his teeth. His analytical brain completely shut down. The notebooks, the strategies, the point systems, the fear of judgment, it all evaporated into the ether. There was only one truth remaining. A friend is in danger. Destroy the threat. Izuku let out a terrifying, guttural snarl. He didn't just twist the lock on his DNA open. He shattered it entirely. GGRAHHH. Izuku threw his arms wide, his body erupting. The transformation from 40% hybrid to full tyrant was a cataclysmic biological event. The air temperature violently spiked, evaporating the moisture in the air and blowing the dust cloud away in a massive shockwave of displaced oxygen. Bones cracked, lengthened, and thickened with the sound of snapping timber. Izuku's human face vanished, thrusting forward into a massive, heavily armored, 5-foot-long skull. His torso expanded exponentially, packing on tons of hydraulic muscle mass in milliseconds. His legs warped into massive, tree-trunk-sized pillars of power, his talons anchoring deep into the asphalt. Uraraka opened her eyes, startled by the sudden shockwave. Standing over her, completely eclipsing the shadow of the zero-pointer, was a mountain of emerald scales and primordial fury. Izuku had grown to his absolute maximum size. He stood 22 feet tall at the hip, measuring nearly 50 feet from his terrifying snout to the tip of his muscular tail. He weighed over 10 tons. D-Dinosaur-kun? Uraraka whispered, completely awestruck. Izuku didn't look down. He kept his massive body positioned directly over her, shielding her fragile form from the falling debris with his impenetrable scales. He raised his colossal head and locked his glowing, golden eyes on the zero-pointer's single red optic. The machine registered the biological anomaly. It halted its foot, recalibrating its threat assessment. Izuku didn't give it the chance. He unhinged his massive jaws, drawing in a breath that seemed to pull the very air out of the street, and unleashed the true roar of the Tyrant King. It was a sound that broke the fundamental laws of physics. The concussive audio wave blasted forward with the force of a bomb. The glass in every remaining building within a 5-block radius instantly shattered into powder. The asphalt ripped up from the ground. Examinees a block away were knocked flat onto their backs, covering their bleeding ears. In the observation room, the noise dampeners on the microphones instantly blew out in a shower of sparks, plunging the room into stunned silence. Mizu dropped his teacup. It shattered on the floor. Down in the street, the zero-pointer physically staggered backward from the sheer kinetic force of the roar. Izuku charged. He didn't run like a human. He ran like an apex predator designed to hunt down the largest prey on the planet. Each step of his massive feet caused localized earthquakes. The zero-pointer recovered, swinging a massive, building-sized fist down toward the approaching beast. Izuku didn't dodge. The muscles in his colossal thighs compressed, holding tons of kinetic energy. Jump! Izuku launched himself entirely off the ground. The sheer force of his leap cratered the street, blowing a hole in the concrete all the way down to the sewage pipes. The 10-ton dinosaur sailed through the air with terrifying, lethal grace. He completely vaulted over the descending mechanical fist, soaring up to the chest level of the skyscraper-sized robot. Izuku collided with the zero-pointer's chest plating. The impact was akin to a meteor strike. The reinforced steel buckled and groaned inward under the sheer weight of the prehistoric beast. Izuku's massive talons dug deep into the armor, anchoring him to the vertical surface of the robot. The zero-pointer's red eye flickered wildly as it tried to reach up and grab the beast on its chest. Izuku moved faster. His muscular neck coiled back, and he violently slammed his massive skull forward, driving his jaws directly into the robot's heavily armored neck joint. His serrated, banana-sized teeth sank into the metal as easily as a hot knife through butter. Sparks rained down like fireworks as Izuku bit through 3 feet of reinforced steel, severing the primary neural trunk of the machine. But he wasn't done. Izuku's eyes widened, filled with feral determination. He dug his jaws deeper, past the armor, past the wiring, until he felt the intense, radiating heat of the machine's primary power core resting within its chest cavity. He clamped his jaws entirely around the glowing blue generator. With a roar that was half muffled by steel, Izuku planted his massive feet against the robot's chest and violently threw his head back, using his entire 10-ton body weight as leverage. screch snap. The sound of the robot's internal skeleton failing echoed across the city. Izuku violently ripped the primary power core entirely out of the robot's chest. The zero-pointer froze. Its massive red eye flickered, dimmed, and died. Internal explosions ripped through its joints as the colossal machine slowly tilted backward, completely decapitated of its power source. It crashed onto its back, destroying an entire city block in a cloud of dust and fire. High above the falling robot, Izuku flipped backward through the air. He spat the ruined, sparking power core from his mouth. He manipulated his mass mid-air, shifting his tail to ensure a perfect landing. He landed heavily, crouching low, his talons sliding through the asphalt to absorb the impact. He let out a long, hissing breath of steam, his chest heaving. The mock city was entirely silent, save for the crackle of localized fires. Every single examinee was staring, paralyzed by awe, terror, and an undeniable, instinctual reverence. They had just watched a boy turn into a monster and rip a god from the sky. Izuku blinked. The golden light in his eyes softened back into a warm emerald green. He realized Uraraka was still trapped. In a massive, billowing cloud of green vapor, the dinosaur rapidly evaporated. Izuku shrank back down into his human form. His shirt had been completely obliterated by the transformation, leaving him bare-chested, his impressive musculature covered in soot, sweat, and a faint dusting of remaining green scales. He rushed over to Uraraka. With his 30% hybrid strength easily accessible, he gripped the massive concrete slab and tossed it aside like it was made of styrofoam. "Are you okay?" Izuku asked, his voice panicked, completely dropping the terrifying aura of the beast. He hovered his hands over her leg, too afraid to touch it in case it was broken. "I am so sorry. Did I scare you? Is your leg broken? I can carry you to the nurse." Uraraka just stared up at him. She looked at his terrified, freckled face, and then looked at the smoking, decapitated mountain of steel behind him. "You," Uraraka whispered, her eyes wide. "You're amazing." Izuku blushed so hard his ears felt like they were on fire. Time is up." President Mike screamed through the speakers, his voice cracking slightly. Izuku collapsed onto his butt, completely exhausted. The adrenaline left his system, leaving him feeling like he had just run a marathon while wearing a lead suit. But he was smiling. He had done it. He had saved someone. The week following the exam was agonizing. Izuku spent it mostly staring at his mailbox, alternating between nervous pacing and stress-eating massive amounts of protein. When the letter finally arrived, it wasn't a piece of paper. It was a small metal disc that projected a massive, high-definition hologram of All Might. "I am here as a projection." All Might boomed. Izuku gasped, sitting crisscross on his bedroom floor. All Might explained his new position as a teacher at UA. He then brought up the scoreboard. "You performed excellently in the written exam, young Midoriya. And in the practical, you scored an incredible 74 villain points. However, that is not the whole story." The projection shifted, showing a video of the observation room. It showed Uraraka approaching President Mike after the exam, begging to share her points with the boy who had saved her. "Your quirk is terrifying, my boy," All Might said, his voice dropping the booming persona, speaking softly and directly to Izuku. "But you did not use it to conquer. You used it to protect. A hero course that rejects someone who saves a life is no hero course at all." The screen flashed. Rescue points, 60. Villain points, 74. Total score, 134. First place, All Might smiled, holding out his hand. "Welcome, Izuku Midoriya. This is your hero academia." Izuku bowed his head, tears dripping onto his bedroom floor. The beast within his soul purred, finally at peace. He wasn't a monster anymore. He was a hero. Miles away, in the dark, sterile bunker beneath the earth, the monitors glowed with illicitly obtained footage of the UA entrance exam. All for One sat in his life support chair, the silence in the room heavy and suffocating. The footage of the massive green T-Rex ripping the power core out of the zero-pointer played on loop. With every replay, the heart monitor beside All for One beeped just a little bit faster. Kurogiri, All for One wheezed, his scarred hands trembling slightly as they gripped the armrests. "Yes, Master? Accelerate the Nomu project." prioritize shock absorption and hyperregeneration. All for one lean forward, the dark, eyeless ruin of his face locked onto the screen. We are going to need something entirely unkillable to hunt that thing down. The transition from middle school outcast to UA hero course student was a psychological whiplash that Izuku Midoriya was still struggling to process. A week ago, he was a pariah. Today, he was standing in the locker room of Class 1A, surrounded by the most elite teenage superhumans in the country. Whoa, Midoriya, right? Izuku turned around, carefully pulling his uniform shirt over his head so his dorsal scales wouldn't snag the fabric. Standing behind him was a boy with spiky red hair and a shark-like grin. Eijiro Kirishima pointed a thumb at Izuku's incredibly broad, scarred back. Man, your physique is insane. Kirishima cheered, flexing his own arms. I saw you at the entrance exam. You turned into that massive green kaiju. That was the manliest thing I've ever seen. But wait, why are you so buff normally? Does your quirk affect your base form? Izuku blinked, slightly overwhelmed by the sudden, friendly attention. Oh. Yes. My quirk is a permanent biological mutation that allows for extreme muscular and skeletal hyperexpansion. Because my DNA carries prehistoric markers, my base bone density is roughly 4 times that of a standard human, and my resting muscle mass is heavily compressed to accommodate rapid shifting without tearing my epidermis. Right on, bro. Kirishima laughed, clearly lost but deeply supportive. I'm Kirishima. Let's do our best today, right? Izuku smiled warmly. He turned to his locker and pulled out his hero costume. He had submitted his design requests to the UA support company with extreme, almost neurotic detail. Because his quirk fundamentally altered his size, shape, and anatomy, a standard spandex suit would be shredded the moment he transformed. 10 minutes later, Class 1A stepped out of the dark tunnel and into the bright sunlight of ground beta. The students looked incredible, a vibrant kaleidoscope of colors and designs. But when Izuku stepped out of the tunnel, a hush fell over the immediate vicinity. Izuku's hero costume was a masterpiece of tactical engineering. It was heavily inspired by modern military stealth gear, colored in deep, forest greens and matte blacks. The suit was comprised of a hyper-elastic, smart memory polymer woven with unstable molecules. It clung to his impressive frame perfectly. It was sleeveless, exposing his heavily muscled arms, which were currently dusted with a faint layer of resting emerald scales. He wore thick, reinforced combat pants with modular, breakaway seams down the calves to accommodate his shift into a digitigrade stance. The back of the suit was entirely open from the shoulder blades down to the tailbone, ensuring his massive dorsal ridges and heavy tail could erupt without restriction. He wore heavy, steel-toed combat boots designed to expand, and a metallic, jaw-shaped rebreather mask rested comfortably around his neck, designed to protect his lungs from localized debris clouds when he roared. He didn't look like a flashy superhero. He looked like an Apex Strike Force operative. Deku-kun. Izuku looked up to see Achiko Uraraka jogging toward him. She was wearing a pink and black, space-themed suit with bulky bracers and boots. Wow! Uraraka beamed, looking him up and down. You look so cool. And really intimidating. It totally fits your quirk. Thank you, Uraraka-san. Izuku stammered, rubbing the back of his neck, his cheeks flushing red. Your suit is, really functional. The bracers must help mitigate the nausea from your zero gravity, right? Yup. You noticed that right away, huh? You're so smart. Before Izuku could die of embarrassment, a massive, booming voice echoed across the training ground. They say the clothes make the pro, young ladies and gentlemen. And you all look absolutely heroic. All Might strode into the sunlight, wearing his Silver Age costume, his cape billowing majestically. Izuku's eyes practically turned into stars. Today, we take a step away from robots and move into human combat. All Might announced. The battle trial. You will be split into teams of 2. One team will be the heroes, and the other will be the villains. The villains are guarding a nuclear weapon hidden inside the building. The heroes must either capture the weapon or apprehend the villains within the time limit. Villains win if they protect the payload or capture the heroes. The class erupted into a flurry of questions. All Might laughed them off, pulling out a small lottery box. Teams and opponents will be decided by drawing lots. Let us begin. Izuku watched intently as the letters were drawn. He reached in, pulling out a white ball marked with a black A. Oh! We're on the same team, Deku-kun! Uraraka cheered, holding up her matching A ball. Izuku smiled, feeling a surge of relief. That's great. Our quirks have excellent synergy. If I need to lift something heavy, your anti-gravity can mitigate the structural strain on the floor, and the first matchup will be. All Might reached into 2 separate boxes, pulling out 2 balls. Team A will be the heroes. And Team D will be the villains. Izuku's blood ran cold. He slowly turned his head toward the other side of the group. Standing there, wearing a sleek black, green, and orange costume equipped with massive, grenade-shaped gauntlets, was Katsuki Bakugo. Katsuki didn't look surprised. He didn't look angry. He looked entirely, lethally focused. His crimson eyes locked onto Izuku, and a slow, savage grin spread across his face. He pounded his fist into his open palm, letting off a sharp, crackling explosion. Izuku felt the primordial energy in his marrow twitch in response. A heavy, suffocating tension settled over the class. The other students instinctively took a step back from the 2 boys. It was the Predator versus the Grenadier. Inside the dark, concrete walls of the mock building's 5th floor, the villain team was making their preparations. Tenya Ida, fully clad in his white armor, was attempting to get into character. He stood in front of the papier-mâché nuclear missile, striking a dramatic pose. I am the pinnacle of evil, behold my wicked intellect. Bakugo, as my cohort in crime, how should we fortify this room? Katsuki stood by the doorway, staring out into the dark hallway. He didn't even look at Ida. Shut up, Four Eyes. I don't care about the weapon, Ida gasped, deeply offended. This is a training exercise. We must respect the scenario. The scenario is that Deku is going to come through that front door, Katsuki growled, his voice low and vibrating with intense adrenaline. And I'm going to put him in the ground. Katsuki cracked his neck. His mind was racing, analyzing his opponent. He remembered the sludge villain. He remembered the terrifying, concussive force of Izuku's jaws crushing the 0-pointer. He's an idiot, Katsuki rationalized to himself, gritting his teeth. He relies entirely on sheer, overwhelming mass. If he transforms into that massive kaiju inside this building, he'll collapse the entire structure. He'll bury the weapon and fail the objective instantly. He can't use his full power here. Katsuki raised his gauntlet. If he tries to use that half-baked lizard form, he'll be a massive, slow target in these narrow hallways. I'll hit him with consecutive blasts, blind his reptilian eyes, and blow his eardrums out. He's just a dumb animal playing hero. Stay here and guard the stupid nuke, Katsuki ordered, stepping out into the hallway. I'm going hunting. Outside the building, the hero team was finalizing their strategy. Izuku was unrolling a schematic of the building on the hood of a nearby police car prop. Uraraka stood beside him, looking nervously at the towering structure. So, Bakugo-kun seems really intense, Uraraka said softly. Are you two like rivals? Something like that, Izuku replied, his eyes scanning the blueprints. Kaken is a combat genius. His quirk, explosion, allows him to secrete nitroglycerin sweat from his palms and ignite it. The more he sweats, the stronger his blasts become. In an enclosed space like this, he's a walking artillery cannon. That sounds bad for us, Uraraka gulped. Should you turn into the big guy? You could just knock the walls down. No, Izuku shook his head firmly. If I exceed a 40% manifestation, the resulting kinetic shockwaves from my footsteps alone could compromise the structural integrity of the building. The objective is to secure the weapon safely. Collapsing the ceiling on top of it is a failure. Izuku tapped his pen against the paper. Kaken knows this. He thinks I'm severely handicapped by the environment. He thinks that because I can't go big, I'm just a slow, heavy brawler. Izuku slowly closed his eyes. He took a deep breath, reaching deep within his biological core. Uraraka, Izuku said, his voice beginning to drop an octave, resonating with a deep, guttural vibration. I'm going to alter my mass. I need you to float yourself to mask your footsteps. Follow closely behind me. When Kaken attacks, I will intercept. You bypass us and find Ida. Can you do that? Yes. But wait, alter your mass? Izuku exhaled a cloud of hot, green steam. 15% manifestation, stealth tyrant. Uraraka gasped as the boy before her shifted. It wasn't the explosive, ground-shattering transformation she had seen at the entrance exam. This was smooth, terrifyingly quiet, and deeply unnatural. Izuku's body compressed rather than expanded. He actually lost a few inches of height, dropping into a deep, permanent crouch. His boots broke open as his feet shifted entirely into three-toed, sickle-clawed talons wrapped in dark green scales. His heavy tail whipped out from his spine, but it was thinner, more aerodynamic, constantly swaying with whip-like precision to maintain absolute balance. Scales erupted only on his vitals, his throat, his chest, and his forearms. His face remained mostly human, but his jaw elongated slightly, and his teeth sharpened into needle-like points. But the most striking change was his eyes. The warm emerald green vanished, replaced by an intensely piercing, glowing gold. The pupils narrowed into razor-thin slits that rapidly dilated and contracted, taking in every photon of light. He didn't look like a T-Rex. He looked like an incredibly muscular, human-sized velociraptor. He looked like an assassin. Izuku turned his head. His movements were sudden, jerky, and impossibly fast. He sniffed the air, his nostrils flaring wide. I smell him, Izuku hissed, his voice a sibilant whisper. Burnt sugar and ozone. 3rd floor. North corridor. Uraraka shivered, genuinely intimidated. Oh, okay. Let's go. Hero team, you may enter. All Might's voice rang through their earpieces. Izuku didn't walk through the front door. He lunged. He moved with absolute silence. The pads of his taloned feet absorbed all sound. He navigated the dark hallways at highway speeds, leaping off the walls to bypass staircases, moving like a phantom through the shadows. Uraraka trailed behind him, floating through the air, struggling to keep up with his blistering pace. In the monitor room, the rest of Class 1A watched in stunned silence. Whoa, he shrank? Cyril gasped. I thought his quirk only made him huge. Look at his speed, Todoroki muttered, his mismatched eyes narrowing in genuine surprise. He's moving through a blind environment without checking his corners, yet he hasn't hit a single tripwire. He's tracking Bakugo via scent, Aizawa noted from the back of the room, sipping from a juice pouch. He's completely bypassed his reliance on sight. He's utilizing his predator physiology for tactical espionage. Brilliant. Back in the building, Izuku held up a clawed hand. Uraraka instantly stopped. They were in a long, dark hallway on the 3rd floor. Izuku's ear twitched. He heard the microscopic shift of fabric against concrete. He smelled the heavy, intoxicating stench of nitroglycerin pooling just around the blind corner 20 feet ahead. He's waiting for me to step into the intersection, Izuku analyzed. A standard ambush. He'll lead with a right hook, aiming for my face to blind my optics. Izuku lowered his body until his chest was practically parallel with the floor. Stay here, Izuku whispered to Uraraka. Izuku deliberately took a heavy, stomping step forward. Around the corner, Katsuki's eyes widened. Gotcha. Katsuki lunged out from behind the wall, his right palm sparking violently. Take this, you damn lizard! He unleashed a massive explosion, filling the hallway with blinding orange fire and a deafening roar. The shockwave rattled the windows. Katsuki grinned savagely, landing on his feet. But as the smoke cleared, his grin vanished. The hallway was empty. What? Katsuki gasped. Swish. Katsuki felt a displacement of air directly above him. He looked up. Izuku was clinging entirely to the ceiling. His massive talons had pierced the concrete like wet clay, anchoring his body in the shadows. His golden eyes glowed in the darkness, staring down at Katsuki with cold, calculating precision. Before Katsuki could raise his hands, Izuku dropped. He didn't attack with his claws. Izuku fell back first, whipping his massive, aerodynamic tail around like a baseball bat. The heavily armored appendage slammed squarely into Katsuki's torso. The impact was perfectly calculated, strong enough to knock the wind entirely out of the explosive boy, but not strong enough to break his ribs. Katsuki was launched backward, sliding across the linoleum floor and crashing into the wall. Izuku landed perfectly on his feet, his tail swishing behind him. He didn't gloat. He didn't roar. He simply stood up, raising his armored forearms into a flawless, martial arts guarding stance. Go, Uraraka, Izuku commanded calmly. Uraraka, who had been watching from around the corner, instantly deactivated her gravity and bolted down the opposite hallway toward the stairs. Right. You're not getting away. Katsuki coughed, pushing himself off the wall. He aimed his left palm at Uraraka's retreating back. Bang! Izuku crossed the 20-foot distance in a fraction of a second. He placed himself directly in the line of fire. He raised his left arm, focusing his biological energy. Thick, diamond-hard emerald scales violently rippled and locked together across his forearm just as the explosion hit. The fire washed over Izuku, but the scales entirely absorbed the thermal shock and kinetic force. He didn't even flinch. Don't look away, Kaken, Izuku warned, his golden eyes piercing through the dissipating smoke. Your fight is with me. Katsuki stared at the unburned, unbothered arm of his rival. A vein throbbed furiously in his forehead. You think you're so smart, huh? Katsuki growled, small pops of nitroglycerin snapping from his palms. You shrink down so I can't hit a big target? You think a little armor is going to save you from me? Katsuki rushed forward. He didn't just throw blind punches. Katsuki was a prodigy. He used small explosions from his palms to propel his body in erratic, unpredictable zigzag patterns, bouncing off the walls of the narrow corridor. Izuku tracked him. To a normal human, Katsuki was a blur of motion and fire. But to the golden, slit-pupiled eyes of an apex predator, Katsuki's movements were telegraphed. Katsuki swung a massive right hook aimed directly at Izuku's chest. Instead of backing away, Izuku stepped into the strike. He parried Katsuki's wrist with his left hand, entirely negating the blast vector and forcing the explosion to detonate harmlessly against the ceiling. Simultaneously, Izuku swept his right leg, his talons hooking behind Katsuki's ankle. Katsuki lost his balance. He spun in the air, attempting to right himself with a blast from his left hand. Izuku was already there. He brought his heavy tail up in a sweeping arc, catching Katsuki midair and slamming him back down onto the floor. Gah! Katsuki spat, rolling rapidly to avoid a stomp from Izuku's clawed foot. Katsuki sprang to his feet, creating distance. He was breathing heavily, his mind spinning. What the hell is this? Katsuki thought, wiping a smear of soot from his cheek. He's not fighting like a monster. He's not trying to crush me. He's outmaneuvering me. He's predicting my blasts and countering my momentum. You're relying too much on large, sweeping blasts, Kaken, Izuku analyzed aloud, his voice unnervingly calm. In this narrow environment, the concussive feedback of your own explosions is disorienting your inner ear. Furthermore, by telegraphing your primary striking arm, you leave your center of gravity exposed. Katsuki's blood boiled. The giant, terrifying kaiju wasn't just a brute. He was a nerd operating a bioweapon. Don't lecture me, DKU, Katsuki let loose. He abandoned strategy in favor of overwhelming, oppressive firepower. He unleashed a barrage of continuous, rapid-fire explosions, turning the hallway into a blinding tunnel of fire. The monitors in the observation room flared white, blinding the class. He's going to kill him! Kirishima yelled, shielding his eyes. Bakugo, rein it in! All Might ordered through the comms. You will compromise the building. Inside the inferno, Izuku didn't panic. Temperature is rising. Oxygen is rapidly depleting. I need to end this before he brings the ceiling down. Izuku dropped onto all fours. He channeled his energy entirely into his dermal armor, covering his back and head in a thick carapace of green scales. He charged straight into the fire. Katsuki felt the impact before he saw it. Izuku didn't punch him. He simply tackled Katsuki at 70 miles per hour. The sheer kinetic force of the impact drove both of them through the drywall of the corridor and into an adjacent, empty office room. They crashed through desks and chairs, rolling across the floor. Katsuki scrambled backward, his palms smoking violently. He was cornered against a large window overlooking the mock city. He was exhausted, his arms aching from the recoil of his own power. Izuku slowly stood up from the wreckage. He was completely unharmed. The fire hadn't even singed his hair. His golden eyes locked onto Katsuki with a predatory, unrelenting focus. "It's over, Kaken," Izuku said, taking a slow step forward. "Uraraka has reached the top floor. She is engaging Ida. You can't stop me and get to her in time." Katsuki gritted his teeth. He looked down at his right gauntlet. The grenade pin was glowing slightly, indicating that the internal reservoir of nitroglycerin sweat was completely full. "Over?" Katsuki whispered, a manic grin spreading across his face. "You think you've figured me out, Deku? You think because you wear a little armor you're invincible?" Katsuki raised his right arm, wrapping his left hand around the massive pin of the gauntlet. "If they designed these gauntlets the way I asked them to," Katsuki laughed, "they store my sweat inside. Meaning, this isn't just an explosion. This is artillery." In the monitor room, All Might bolted upright. "Young Bakugo, stop. Are you trying to kill him? If you fire that indoors, you'll incinerate the room. He won't die if he dodges." Katsuki screamed. Izuku's pupils dilated. His brain calculated the payload in an instant. Massive thermal expansion. The blast radius will cover the entire room. If I dodge, the structural supports behind me will vaporize, bringing the top floor down on Uraraka. Izuku couldn't dodge. He couldn't block it. Even his scales would melt under a concentrated blast of that magnitude. He only had one option: move faster than the ignition spark. Katsuki pulled the pin. The mechanical lock clicked. The striker sparked. The highly concentrated nitroglycerin began to rapidly expand. Bang! Izuku didn't run away. He didn't brace for impact. He dropped to his stomach and threw his body forward like a torpedo, sliding across the slick linoleum floor. He slid entirely underneath the trajectory of the massive, room-clearing blast. A torrent of blinding, roaring fire erupted over Izuku's back, instantly vaporizing the desks, the ceiling tiles, and blowing a massive hole entirely through the side of the building. The heat was agonizing, scorching the edges of Izuku's scales, but he was below the primary blast wave. Katsuki lowered his smoking gauntlet, panting heavily. The room was destroyed. "Take that, you stupid lizard," Katsuki wheezed. Suddenly, a massive, scaled tail whipped out from the smoke beneath him. The heavy appendage wrapped around Katsuki's ankles, violently pulling his feet out from under him. Katsuki hit the floor hard, all the air rushing from his lungs. Before he could even process what had happened, a crushing, terrifying weight slammed down onto his chest. Izuku straddled Katsuki's torso. He pinned Katsuki's explosive palms to the floor with his knees. His massive, taloned hands slammed down on either side of Katsuki's head, shattering the floor tiles. Katsuki tried to thrash, tried to scream, but he was completely immobilized. The physical strength difference was insurmountable. He was trapped under a mountain of coiled muscle. Izuku leaned down. The shadow of his elongated jaw fell over Katsuki's face. Katsuki's breath hitched. He looked up into those glowing, golden, slit-pupiled eyes. There was no anger in them. There was no malice. There was only the absolute, undeniable certainty of a predator that had successfully hunted its prey. Izuku opened his jaws. He didn't unleash the city-shattering sonic boom from the entrance exam. That would have killed Katsuki. Instead, Izuku focused his vocal cords, compressing the sound into a localized, ear-piercing frequency. Izuku let out a terrifying, guttural raptor shriek mixed with the deep, chest-rattling rumble of a lion, directly into Katsuki's face. The sound was paralyzing. It hit Katsuki's auditory nerves and bypassed his conscious brain entirely, plunging straight into his mammalian hindbrain. For 1.5 seconds, Katsuki Bakugo's mind completely shut down. The arrogance, the pride, the fury, it all vanished, replaced by an overwhelming, primal instinct that screamed, "Prey! Prey! Prey!" Katsuki flinched. He squeezed his eyes shut, his entire body trembling violently, a small, involuntary gasp escaping his lips. He had yielded. Simultaneously, through the comms in Izuku's ear, Uraraka's voice cheered enthusiastically. "I got the weapon! I secured the payload!" The siren blared throughout the mock city. "Hero team wins!" All Might announced over the speakers. The heavy, oppressive silence of the ruined rooms slowly returned. The smoke drifted out of the shattered window. Izuku closed his jaws. He took a deep, shuddering breath. The golden light faded from his eyes, replaced by the soft, familiar emerald green. The scales rapidly receded into his skin. His jaw snapped back into a human shape. His tail vanished. Within seconds, the terrifying predator was gone, replaced by a sweaty, exhausted, freckled teenager. Izuku slowly lifted his weight off Katsuki, shifting backward and sitting on his heels. He extended a hand toward the blond boy. Good match, Kaken, Izuku panted, offering a genuine, tired smile. Your blast radius was a lot wider than I calculated. If I had been a second slower, you would have got me. Katsuki lay on the floor, staring blankly at the ceiling. His chest heaved. He could still hear the ringing in his ears. He could still feel the phantom weight of the beast pinning him down. He could still feel the humiliating, terrifying flinch in his own body. He slowly sat up, completely ignoring Izuku's outstretched hand. He looked at Izuku. He didn't see a dumb animal. He didn't see a giant target. He saw a genius who had completely, masterfully weaponized his own monstrosity. He saw a boy who had analyzed his opponent, handicapped his own power, baited his attacks, and systematically dismantled him. Katsuki gritted his teeth, his pride shattered into a million pieces. But beneath the anger, a new, dark ember of respect ignited. I didn't lose to your Quirk, Deku, Katsuki muttered darkly, standing up and brushing the dust off his costume. He glared down at Izuku. I lost to you? Don't think it'll ever happen again. Katsuki turned and walked out of the destroyed room. Izuku watched him go, a small, satisfied smile touching his lips. He had proven his point. The walk back to the monitor room was quiet. When Izuku stepped through the doors, the entire class stared at him with a mixture of profound awe and lingering caution. Kirishima was the first to break the silence. Dude! Kirishima yelled, running up and punching Izuku lightly on the shoulder. That was unbelievable. You totally dominated him without even destroying the building. You were like a ninja dinosaur. A ninja dinosaur, Kaminari nodded approvingly. That is the coolest sentence ever spoken. It wasn't just me, Izuku stammered, rubbing his neck, instantly reverting to his flustered, nerdy persona. Uraraka secured the payload. If she hadn't distracted Ida, Kaken could have regrouped. All Might stood at the front of the room, looking at the four students. Katsuki stood in the far corner, his arms crossed, his eyes glued to the floor in seething silence. An excellent display! All Might boomed. Now, who can tell me who the MVP of this match was? Momo Yayorozu raised her hand elegantly. It was Midoriya, sir. Correct. And can you explain why, young Yayorozu? Of course, Momo stepped forward, adjusting her posture. From the very beginning, Midoriya analyzed the environmental constraints. He knew his full power would compromise the objective, so he voluntarily limited his manifestation to a highly compressed, stealth-oriented form. This allowed him to navigate the narrow corridors without causing collateral damage. Momo looked at Izuku with genuine admiration. Furthermore, he accurately predicted his opponent's psychological state. He knew Bakugo was fixated on him. By engaging Bakugo in a controlled, defensive duel, he deliberately drew all the aggressive aggro away from his partner, ensuring Uraraka a clear path to the objective. He tanked the damage, controlled the pacing of the fight, and neutralized the threat without causing any permanent injury to his opponent. Momo glanced at Katsuki. Bakugo, on the other hand, allowed his personal vendetta to completely blind him to the objective. He abandoned his teammate, caused massive structural damage to the facility, and ultimately fired a lethal blast indoors that could have destroyed the very weapon he was supposed to protect. Katsuki gripped his biceps so hard his knuckles turned white, but he didn't argue. He knew she was right. An absolutely flawless analysis. All Might praised, giving Momo a thumbs up. Heroes must use their heads as much as their bodies. Midoriya demonstrated absolute mastery over both his quirk and his tactical environment. Excellent work. Izuku bowed, a warm flush of pride spreading across his chest. He looked over at All Might. The skeletal man hidden beneath the muscular facade gave Izuku a small, deeply proud nod. The rest of the battle trials proceeded smoothly. Izuku spent the entire time furiously writing in his notebook, analyzing the quirks of his classmates. He watched Todoroki freeze an entire building in a matter of seconds, noting the terrifying efficiency of the ice user. He watched Tokoyami utilize dark shadow in the enclosed spaces. By the end of the day, Class 1A was exhausted. As they walked back to the main campus in the late afternoon sun, Izuku found himself walking alongside Uraraka and Ida. "I must apologize, Midoriya," Ida said stiffly, chopping the air with his hand. "I severely misjudged you during the entrance exam. I assumed your appearance and muttering indicated a lack of focus. Today, you proved yourself to be a tactician of the highest caliber. I am honored to study alongside you." "Oh! Thank you, Ida-kun." Izuku smiled, waving his hands. "Your speed is incredible too. If Uraraka hadn't floated the weapon away, I don't think I could have caught you in a foot race. You guys were totally awesome," Uraraka beamed, stretching her arms above her head. "I feel like I'm way behind you too. I gotta work harder." Izuku looked at his friends. For the first time in his entire life, he was part of a group. He wasn't the weird kid. He wasn't the monster. He was a peer. As they approached the massive front gates of UA, Izuku paused. He looked back toward the training grounds, the setting sun casting long shadows across the concrete. Deep within his chest, a subtle, primal instinct flared, a sudden, unexplainable chill running down his spine. It was the feeling a predator gets when it realizes it is being watched by something unseen. Izuku narrowed his golden-flecked eyes, scanning the horizon. There was nothing there. Just the empty city and the quiet hum of the wind. "Deku-kun? You coming?" Uraraka called out. Izuku blinked, shaking his head. "Yeah. I'm coming." He turned and walked through the gates, ignoring the lingering feeling of dread. He had won the day. But the true hunt was just beginning. Far away, in a dimly lit bar functioning as the hideout for the League of Villains, a young man with pale blue hair and hands covering his body sat on a barstool. Tamura Shigaraki aggressively scratched at his neck, watching a muted television broadcast regarding UA High's new security measures. Behind the bar, Kurojiri wiped a glass. "Tamura Shigaraki. The master has sent a directive regarding the upcoming assault on the USJ." Shigaraki stopped scratching. "Sensei? What does he want?" "We already have the anti-symbol of peace ready to crush All Might." "Indeed. The Nomu is prepared," Kurojiri replied smoothly. "However, the master has updated the target priority list. While All Might remains the primary objective, there is a secondary target among the student body. A boy named Izuku Midoriya." Shigaraki tilted his head, the severed hand over his face shifting slightly. "A student? Why does Sensei care about an NPC?" "The master was very specific," Kurojiri said, his yellow eyes glowing in the mist. "He desires to observe this boy's quirk in a live combat scenario against fatal odds. The master wishes to see if the beast can bleed." Shigaraki smirked, a dry, cracked sound escaping his lips. "Fine. If the final boss wants a side quest completed, we'll oblige. We'll crush All Might, and we'll skin the kid alive." Shigaraki picked up a photograph lying on the bar counter. It was a still image from the entrance exam, showing the massive green T-Rex roaring at the sky. Shigaraki pressed his 5 fingers against the photograph. The paper instantly decayed, crumbling into dust and falling through his fingers like dirty snow. "Let's go hunting."